Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia video, and like I said before, I think I had one more tier list in me, and so what we're going to do is, because DFFOO is hitting end of service, I wanted to do a top 10 best characters in the game's history, and you're going to find that this list isn't going to be as straightforward as you're thinking. And I want to qualify kind of how I'm making this list. The way I'm ranking these characters, it's based on, in the game's history, when they released, how they like define the game? Did they define a meta? How broken or busted were these characters, and how long did they last? Like, these are the types of things I'm thinking about. So you might see some characters on here that seem kind of surprising, but it's like, if you think about it, these are characters that were used a ton by most players in the meta for like a really long time, or they like completely changed how we played the game. They completely made the game trivial for certain amounts of the game's period. So you're going to see some characters that maybe haven't been good in a long time, but they were really good in specific parts of the game's history. And this is kind of like, once again, kind of a way to honor the game's history and talk about some of the different times in the game's history, right? So I do have a few honorable mentions I want to bring up. So I'm going to bring up Cid Raines here first, as a very meta-defining character when he first came out, for being like the god of launching and being crazy. The only reason I didn't put him on my top 10 is there is another character you will see on my top 10 that kind of, to me, that character was more impactful in the game's history because they defined like a launch meta. And because they were the ones that defined the launch meta, I ranked them higher than Cid Raines. And they were, I would say, maybe a little bit even more impactful when they came out because they were the key to doing launching, okay? The next one I have is Renoa. Renoa, when she first came out, was ridiculously busted. And what was so crazy about her was she had pretty much, like, when she was in her Angel Wing mode, she had an HP plus attack that like hit AoE and it hit everybody. And this was, during an older time of the game when the game was very challenging and running out of skill uses was a huge problem. And the fact that anytime a character had a really good HP plus, that was really busted because it saved you skill uses. It gave them longevity, and her HP plus was more powerful than most characters' like skill attacks. So Renoa on release was crazy. The reason she didn't make my top 10 is there's a character that fulfilled a very similar role to her that is higher up on my list, that was way more busted. So we'll just put it that way. Then I'm going to kind of lump Penelo, Aerith, and Garnet all together. And they did not make my top 10 all time. And that's going to tell you kind of how crazy this list is, that these characters aren't on there. And the reason why these characters I want to at least mention them, is these are all insanely busted support characters, with Garnet and Penelo being anniversary units that lasted in the meta at least a year or more, just because of how insanely busted they are, right? So they're just insanely good, but I wouldn't say that any of them like defined a meta. They were just both like, these characters were all just like the top of their class as support characters at one point or another. But the characters on my top 10, I am really looking for characters that kind of change the game, right? Like, and that's what I'm really thinking about when I look at this. And I think back, because the nice thing for me is I've experienced all of these characters through every portion of the game, and I can just think back of like how impactful certain characters were, right? So these are definitely honorable mentions, but they did not make my top 10. Paladin Cesil, I really wanted to put him in my top 10, and some of you, like, maybe newish players might be like, what? I've never even, like, nobody even talks about Paladin Cesil. Why should he be even an honorable mention? Paladin Cesil, I think it was LD era. This dude was like the freaking king. And I remembered that when he launched, I believe, with a Dimension's End. And if you didn't have him, it was almost impossible. And Paladin Cesil was so busted just because, like, back then, like, the quality of support unit, the quality of auras we had just weren't there. And this guy, like, really was a meta defining in terms of like insane auras and like what he did kind of in his support role. And he was so good to the fact that they did, I think, holy lockouts for like 1 or 2 months after this guy came out. Somebody can quote me in there, but I'm pretty sure it was 1 to 2 months of holy lockout because of this guy. Because the devs actually designed the game against this character. He definitely deserves to be mentioned here, right? And this is a character I think I did really want on my top 10, and I think you could argue him top 10 because he was meta defining when he dropped. A Medalian, okay, so a Medalian and Quistis. I want to bring both these characters up. Now, these characters were both insanely impactful on the meta when they first came out. A Medalian I'll start with first. A Medalian introduced the concept of turn deletion. So turn deletion was invented by a Medalian, and for that alone, that is a huge impact on the game's meta and the game's history, and I think a Medalian needs to be mentioned. I think the only thing keeping a Medalian and Quistis off of my actual top 10, I actually, like right before recording, dragged them into my top 10, but then I couldn't figure out who to take off. So then I put these two back there. So these guys would be probably like 11 and 12. The only reason maybe that's keeping them out of the top 10 is these characters were impactful as support units more so than in the party. But in terms of support units, these were like must-run supports when they launched. When they came out, like everybody was running a Medalian, and you just brought a Medalian and you cheated the game because you just deleted turns and you won, right? Quistis, you just cheated the game. She was the mega delay character, right? The delay queen. You just brought her as a friend, you just delayed out and won. So like these are characters that as friend units, like they just allowed you to win the game. If you wanted to choose that. And I know there are players that specifically chose not to use these friend units because they wanted the game to be easier. But this is the type of character I'm looking for in a top 10. The type of character where like players maybe actively would not summon for them because they didn't want the game to be too easy. We are talking about, now that we're actually going to get into the top 10, characters that legitimately made the game easier to play and you almost felt like you're cheating by using them, right? So let's go to number 10. And once again, Asos just snuck in there at number 10. He was the one I was going to take off for Quistis or Medalian, but then I couldn't like split them up. To me, they're equal. So I did leave Asos here at number 1. And the only reason why, and I think Asos is a character most of you are going to be familiar with because he's more modern, but he did damage that was so insanely above everybody else for a very long time that he is very impactful, and he did make fights easier, and he did make you feel like you're cheating, right? So just his pure damage being so far ahead of everybody else makes him number 10 on my top 10 characters in DFFOO history of all time, right? Number 9, I'm going to put Gladio. And I would say any other impactful tank in the game you could put as an honorable mention here. But Gladio to me is the character that defines tanks. And he's a character that aged very well, that anytime, even if he was out of the meta, you could always break this guy out. He would keep you safe. He would still do his counter damage. He would still help out. Gladio is a character that pretty much in every meta, that he existed in, he was usable in. But I think just for defining the tank role and the counter tank role, I think he does all of the roles pretty much the best. When he's on his newest rework, he is the best at what he does. In the game's history. So I feel like Gladio is just impactful in terms of defining what tanks do in this game, in the history of the game, right? At number 8, we have Core. Now, Core being one thing just impactful, that he was a very just random global first. It wasn't for an anniversary or a celebration. Just a very out of nowhere character that was very impactful to the community. And it was after people kept misquoting Joshua because it was I believe it was on a Halloween stream. He told us not to expect new characters anymore. And so people thought we weren't ever going to get a global first character again, but people misquoted him because in that video or in that stream, Joshua just said there wouldn't be a new character for that particular anniversary. And I believe he was talking about the 3rd year anniversary. But he didn't say specifically that there would never be a new character again. And so when Core came out, it was a big shock. But obviously he doesn't deserve to be here just because he was this global first shocker. It's because of his impact on the game. Core, kind of took the game by storm in terms of like one of the best off-turn damage dealers in the game. And so I'm putting Core here kind of similar to Gladio in terms of Gladio defining tanks. I feel like Core defines off-turn, and he is the character when I think of first, when I think of off turn. He actually brought rainbow numbers to global before we got them. I believe Setzer was the first rainbow character, but I think we got them core coming first. I think he came before Setzer's rework that gave him the rainbow numbers. So he was like our first exposure to rainbow numbers. Core is a character that was insanely busted. Like you just ran him on any team and he would make everyone their best because he did all of that extra chip damage that was so good. And then having the rainbow numbers was really helpful. And like Gladio, Core is a character that never really left the meta, right? Even when he was quote unquote outdated, he was still worth running. Even though the damage wasn't crazy, he did so much of that over time that it still made him worth running, and he did so many good things. And by the way, his Oath of Absolute Defense, a very, very good buff to have on your characters, right? So Core to me definitely deserves to be up here, right? Number 7, we've got Kais, okay? And Kais is the reason why Sid reigns as an honorable mention, is Kais is the character that defined the launch meta to me. He's the character that when he came out, he was a must get. I believe this was this 35 CP era? I think it was. I think it was 35 era this guy came out. Maybe it was EX era. Actually, it might have been EX era. But, you know, this was the first character that was just like, I'm going to on-demand launch you. I'm going to do extra. For him, what was so impactful was like during the launch, he braved gain mid-launch. And that was just like mind-boggling back then, that you were gaining brave during the launch to really help the HP damage. And this is a character where like Kais, you could just ride him for months on just doing the launch meta and doing insane crazy things with him. And I just have fond memories of Kais being like, oh my gosh. And I remember talking to players that like missed him and it's like, oh, I wish I'd gotten Kais. And I would be like, yep, he's like a must-have character. He was crazy. I think it was like my brother was kind of in and out of the game at the time, and he had just missed Kais or something, and it was like devastating because yeah, this guy was insane. Just huge meta defining in the game's history. Number 6, we're getting up to the real nitty gritty. I'm going to put Lunaf Freya here. Lunaf Freya, and I would say, you know, going back to like the Penelo Garnets or whatever, I'm kind of having Lunaf Freya be my stand-in for the support. And Lunaf Freya to me is more meta defining than the other support characters because of her quick prayer, heavy prayer. And she kind of carried, to me, Lunaf Freya carried the meta from when she came out up until Force Time. Because what she allowed you, or no, it is in the Force Time because she launched with Force, but it's up to Echo era, right? When things kind of changed a little bit with Echo. But pretty much from her launch up until the Echo era, she was really the de facto support you wanted to use. Her quick prayer, so the heavy prayer allowing the extra HP damage is insane, but the quick prayer allowing you to properly set up, because one of the biggest issues in the game was trying to properly set up your burst phase character. So it'd be like, okay, I need to put the burst effect on, but now I gotta wait a turn, you know, for all my characters to go for them to come back. And then it was like trying to line that up with force time so that you're not wasting force turns getting back to your character. Well, what Lunaf Freya allowed you to do was put that quick prayer on, so my character could be like, I'm gonna hit force, I'm gonna hit BT effect, I'm gonna do a setup attack, then I'm gonna go burst phase or whatever, and then you're just set up and good to go. And Lunaf Freya was the meta defining, like she was the support you used for a very, very long time in the game because of her impact and how she handled, like she literally changed the efficiency of the fight, right? Like having Lunaf Freya in some capacity, whether it was through a call or a friend unit or in your party, you just had to have her there in some way. She made your force time way more efficient by her existing. So I think for the majority of early Force era, like this is the meta defining support character. And that's why she is that high up on my list. At number 5, we have Tidus, my boy Tidus. Huge part of the game's meta. And Tidus has been very good at several points in the game's history, but we're talking old school Tidus here because Tidus was the first character in the game to get a Brave and HP attack at the same time. And this defined the game. I know I'm going really old school here with you guys, because now it's like, and nowadays, like in modern DFFOO, you can't, it's really hard to press a button that doesn't deal HP damage in some way, right? In old school DFFOO, for some of you newer players, you either did a brave attack or you did an HP attack, and that was it. So if you did something that was mainly brave damage, it did just brave damage. Because the early concept of the game was they wanted to teach you, you have to attack to steal the brave, and then you have to attack to dump the brave. Okay, so Tidus's slash combo was the first thing that came out that actually did brave damage and HP dumped at the same time. And this was insane. This is like 35 CP era. Like this is old school, right? And Tidus was very meta defining for that. It literally was like saving you a turn. It was like doing 2 attacks in 1 turn, which in this time in the game's history was insanely busted. So Tidus deserves a very high spot for that, being the first ever a brave HP dumping character at the same time. Number 4, we have Selfie. Now, Selfie we could kind of put into that Camelin, or not Camelin, but a Medalian Quist situation where she's really notable as a friend unit, but she's also very good in the party. But Selfie, man, she's just always been there. Like, she's like LD only. Like, Selfie from the moment her LD released has been in the meta literally the entire game's history. Like, she's just been there too long to not mention. So this is a character where you know, we would argue that Kais is really the defining thing for launching, but like Selfie she's just a constant in this game's history. You guys know there's the whole meme of me like calling for like proper selfies and not GIMP selfies, because even like today, like this month when I'm doing character guides and stuff, you know, like before game hit end of service, Selfie is still a character I would routinely look for on the friends list, like still. And she's an LD only character right now. So this is a character that just for her allowing a crazy debuff that just allows you to constantly launch the enemies, like that's all it takes, man. And she's crazy. And you know, when she is like on a recent rework, when she's on a proper rework, she's actually really good in the party as well. Because she's also a force charger, has a good wall debuff, she can heal, like she does all of that other stuff, right? The thing that really holds Quistis and the Medalian back is in the party, they're not like the craziest. Like you really just want their main mechanic of delay or turn deletion, whereas Selfie, you get the launching, but like her regular kit is a lot better in the party than the other 2 characters in terms of being a support character. So Selfie, man, she's so meta defining in that she's just been there for so long and has been so good for so long. Selfie is just a mainstay in this game. Like there's just no negative outlook on Selfie. Like she's just always so good. All right, guys, we're gonna draw it out a little bit. We're about to hit top 3. So if you're watching this video, you know, and don't cheat. If you're watching this video for the first time, maybe pause it. Take a moment. I want you guys to predict who you think the top 3, once again, all-time DFFOO characters in history. What you think I'm going to choose for this, okay? What do you guys think would be the top 3 all-time? Are you guys ready? Number 3 is Saz. Oh my goodness. My boy Saz is at number 3, and this is another old school one here. You guys that are newer players aren't going to understand this. Saz is like the 35 CP god. And Global got his 35 CP early, which was insane. And this dude broke the game. By far best support character by a mile in the game. His brave gaining, his attack buff was insane. This was back in the day where just like your regular attack buffs were like really important. And he had like the strongest attack up. Like, here's the thing. So I'm actually someone that skipped Saz 35 because this was before I researched very heavily and was watching a lot of YouTube. Like this is super early in the game, you guys. Like I think year 1, right? Like very, very early. So I actually missed Saz 35. And then I remember this was around the time I started like getting into YouTube and stuff more and started like hearing about how busted he was. And I remember going into a fight with a team and playing it and being like, all right, that was cool. Then went into the same fight and brought a Saz friend. And my damage output was just so much more insanely higher. Like it was crazy. So Saz, even though, you know, when we look at characters like Penelo, Garnet, whatever, like maybe didn't have the longevity of those characters, man, this guy broke the game. Saz was a cheat code in 35 era. If you use Saz, like you just won, and he was absolutely crazy. So if you're a newer player, maybe I don't know how you would do it, and this is before my channel, right? Like I wasn't doing YouTube back then, but look up some old YouTube stuff of Saz35. He was crazy back then. He was crazy. You can ask the veterans, man. Saz deserves to be up here. Okay. Number 2 meta-defining character of all time in DFFOO is going to be Camlanot, you guys. Camlanot. This guy he broke Force Era, right? And the reason why Camlanot is so impactful, it's actually something that's unintended, right? He wasn't supposed to be as good as he was. So I'll give you guys the brief history on it. So early Force, right? Like Cain, and Cryo, like these were like early Force characters, and you're getting like 5, 10, 15% gains on an attack. You'd end your Force time, you'd be at like 350%, 400%, like woohoo, I just did like 2 million damage in one attack. This is crazy, right? That's what early Force was, right? Camlanot came around. So you guys think about right now, right? Like what type of gains are we getting on Force time right now today, right? Like let's look at Ignis. What are you getting on a Force gain? Guess what? It's 80%, right? Well, guess what Cam did? This is like, he was what? Like the 4th or 5th ever Force character to come out. And once again, you're supposed to be getting like 5, 10, 15, 20% max a turn. Cam allowed you to do 80% per turn back then. Okay. And I believe the devs actually admitted that they intended the game to be longer. They intended the fights to be longer and grindier, and you have to use 2, 3, 4 Force times in a fight, right? That's what they kind of originally wanted. Well, Cam came out, and his Force conditions were unintentionally triggering on launching every single attack. And the devs didn't think about that or program that properly. So in a proper setup where you had an enemy that was paralyzed, you had an Ice Enchanter on, and you're doing ice damage, you were getting 80% in a single launch. Okay, and once again, this was unintentional. Well, rather than fix it, I mean, the devs put themselves in a tough spot, because if you mess up a character, but it's to the player's benefit, it's really hard to go back and change them because players spent money to summon that character. So then if you go back and make him worse, the players feel shafted. You almost have to refund everybody. So they kind of left themselves in a tough spot where they had to say, all right, Cam has to be Cam. So then the reason why Cam is number 2 on my all-time list, 1, he was busted, defined a meta, right? Like did these things I'm talking about, but he actually changed the way the devs developed the game. Because now moving forward, the devs said we have to make like 60 to 80% gains like a thing. They didn't jump right to 80, right? Like characters weren't doing 80 like immediately, but they went up pretty quick to you could get 50, 60%, and then slowly it crept up to 70, and now we're very routinely hitting 80, right? So Cam, even, once they started releasing characters after him and started kind of quote unquote fixing it, he was still like the character to run for a long time. And the game's difficulty, like with and without Cam, were night and day different. So this was a situation where players either chose to use Cam and make the game easy, or they chose not to use him and play the game properly, right? Like properly play the game and have more difficult fights. But Cam to me is a hugely defining character in this game's history and what he meant for the meta, right? All right, number 1. I think most players should know what my number 1 is, but maybe not. My number 1 is 100% Aronea. Aronea legitimately broke the game when she came out. She was an anniversary character. I want to say, was she year 2? Yeah, I think Aronea was year 2, right? It was year 1 Beatrix, year 2 Aronea, year 3 was Balthier and friends, Balthier and Pales, right? So yeah, Aronea, for the entirety of year 2, so what was so busted about Aronea? Her damage was insanely good for what she was, but like Renoa, who I mentioned, so Aronea is the reason why Renoa isn't here, because I see Aronea being like the Renoa before Renoa came, right? So Renoa, to me, the reason why Renoa didn't make my top 10 was Renoa was like a lesser extent of Aronea when she dropped, right? So since Aronea is the situation, she is my number 1. Like, she's crazy. So Aronea having an insanely powerful HP plus attack that did AoE damage, and it was Brave HP damage at the same time, like just all of that into one was crazy. And like I talked about earlier, in these older eras, I think Aronea was EX era, was year 2 EX, I think so. So I think she launched with EX. And this was a time when the game could be difficult or grindy enough where you would run out of skill uses, right? You had a lot less buttons to press. Having an HP plus really helped negate that. Now, the other thing that why Arona was so impactful, she was so good. This is almost the Asos effect, but so good and so far ahead of everyone else's damage that you rode her for pretty much an entire year. And for players that, you know, you see these other players out there that have like 1,000,000 plus gems saved up, Arona was the character that enabled a lot of the player base to stash gems, because players that understood Arona, like if you pulled for characters, if you had Arona in your box and you pulled any other character, you were strictly doing it just for fun because you did not have to. If you ran Arona, you just ran her in every single fight and you stomped every fight in the game for pretty much a year, and she carried the game for the year and the game was cake. So this allowed players, I believe Mark from TCC said he was one of the ones that did this. You just ran Arona the whole time and you saved gems and just didn't pull for like a year. And then that's how players saved up these huge hordes of gems. And ultimately, like, decisions like this could be part of the reason, you know, some of the game's undoing was allowing the players to save up so much. You know, and that's what we love about the game, is that it was so free-to-play friendly. But ultimately, that's why free-to-play friendly games don't do well in the long run, is because then they don't make as much money, right? But Arona was a character that, yeah, you just stomped the entire game for forever, for not forever, but like, yeah, for like at least a year, right? Or at least maybe 8 months to a year. And you just didn't need to pull. It was a very long time until characters started to compete with her. And once again, just allowed everybody to save up. So there you go, guys. There are my top 10 characters of all time. Now, I know this is very subjective and you guys will have different opinions. Feel free to share your memories of maybe some of the things I talked about here. Share maybe if you want to list your top 10, or maybe you just want to shout out a character or two that you feel like deserve to be top 10. But remember, it's not just like, oh, Aerith is so busted, I used her forever, but it's like characters that really are defining the game's history, right? And this is kind of a tribute to the history of the game, right? So let's recap. Number 1, I have Arona. Number 2, I have Camelot. Number 3, I have Saz. Number 4, I have Selfie. Number 5, Tidus. 6, I have Lunaf Freya. Then I have Kais at 7. Number 8, I have Core. Number 9, I have Gladio. Number 10, I have Asos. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all on the next one.